Hello and welcome back to Sleeping Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered through the shadows of Sleeping Noir, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. Winter was closing in on the Canadian tundra in 1985. The kind of winter that didn't feel like a season so much as a force. Inside a stolen SUV, a young mother watched her breath cloud the glass. The fog on the window thickened each time she exhaled, and for a second she stared at it like it might tell her what to do next. Her name was Jane. The Toyota had started out as someone else's problem, taken from her boyfriend's driveway in New Mexico with a set of keys she hadn't even tried to feel guilty about. The SUV had gotten her and her son farther than she ever expected. It had carried them through long, empty highways, through towns that suddenly felt nervous and tense, through stretches of road where the radio was more frightening than the dark outside. But now, under a sky full of snow and silence, the Toyota had finally reached the point where luck and fuel and stubbornness stopped being enough. Outside, the back tire had collapsed into the snow like a dead animal. The chains were a mess, twisted around the rim and half buried, and Jane's mittens were an insult to the cold. They were the kind of cheap knitted mittens you'd pack for a ski trip in Colorado, not for a night where the air could steal your fingers in minutes. Her hands were already numb, and she kept shaking them as if she could wake them back up. Freddie sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in two thin layers, watching the fuel gauge like it was a heartbeat monitor. Jane could see him in the dim light of the dash, his face tight, his eyes fixed on that needle as if staring could hold it in place. When she saw him reach over and turn the heater down, she felt a sharp fear stab her chest. "Freddie," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm just trying to make it last," he muttered, not looking at her. He knew it was cold. Of course he did. But Jane could tell he didn't understand what kind of cold this was. Not the kind where you're uncomfortable, not the kind where you complain. This was the kind where the night itself could kill you if you sat still and waited. Jane watched the darkness outside the windshield, watched the snow swirl in the beams of their headlights, and felt a deep, ugly regret rise up in her. She thought of Frank. Frank would have known what to do with chains and tires. Frank would have had tools. Frank would have made a joke, told her to get back in the car, handled it like it was nothing. He'd left the morning before, heading out of town to lead some construction project. Jane had watched him go with that same numb patience she'd always carried, the instinct that told her when it was time to move and when it was time to stay. She could have given him one more day. She could have waited for him to come home. She could have asked for help, but she stopped that thought before it turned into something that would break her. Freddie barely remembered a time without Frank, and that was part of what made it harder. The boy had started calling him Dad without being asked, and Jane had let it happen because it made everything feel stable, like a normal life could be built if you stacked enough normal things on top of fear. Before Frank, there had been other men, other apartments, other moments where she had learned to leave quickly. Long before SUVs and spare bedrooms and a new VCR sitting in the living room like a trophy, Jane had learned how to disappear. She had learned how to pack fast, how to smile while lying, how to move when her gut told her the ground was going to collapse. She had made her choice to run back in September, even though the thing that triggered it had happened earlier, in July, far away in Louisville, Kentucky. The nuclear detonation had been so distant from New Mexico that at first it felt like something happening on another planet. Jane remembered sitting up with Frank long after midnight, the air warm, the windows open, the television showing shaky footage from helicopters. The camera had hovered over a scar in the earth where a city had been, and the news anchors had tried to sound steady while their eyes looked frightened. At 2 a.m., Jane and Frank had said out loud what they were both thinking. If the Russians were going to launch more, they didn't want to know. They wanted sleep. They wanted to wake up and either be gone or be safe. They woke up safe. No sirens, no fallout, No ash drifting down. Freddie woke up hungry and normal. The next day, he had friends over. Within a week, Frank had new contract offers. Jane picked up cleaning jobs and told herself life would keep moving. That's what life did, right? Even when the world shook, it kept going. But as July turned into August, the story didn't make sense anymore. There were no reports from Moscow about American counterattacks. There was no clear sign the Kremlin had ordered the strike at all. Every night, Reagan appeared on television looking more tired, and respectable newspapers started floating a horrible idea. What if it had been staged? What if it had been a false flag? People started asking the same question in different forms. At work, at church, at backyard barbecues, in line at the grocery store. If Kentucky was a false flag, where was the war? Jane didn't like the question. She didn't like how everyone asked it with curiosity, like the lack of a bigger war was the only mystery. She felt a creeping dread instead, like the missing pieces were missing on purpose. Then, out in the snow beside the Toyota, her mitten slipped against the chain, and the metal scraped hard. Jane jerked upright too fast, and her head banged against the edge of the open door. Pain flashed behind her eyes. She sucked in a breath, swore under her breath, and then froze. In the road behind them, through the darkness and the snow, she saw headlights. Not the dim light of a distant car, not a weak glow fading in and out. These were close enough to be real, coming steadily toward them, beams diffused by falling snow. Jane's heart kicked hard. She didn't know if she felt relief or terror. She ran toward the lights anyway, waving her arms, screaming for the driver to stop. The vehicle that slowed in front of her was an ambulance. Its front end looked old, dirty, as if it had traveled too far without rest. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. For a moment, the snow and the glare of the headlights hid his face. He stood tall but not broad, the shape of someone who'd once been strong and had been worn down. Jane saw the outline of a jacket that looked more like a trucker's coat than a paramedic uniform. That should have worried her, but she was too cold, too desperate, too trapped. "Can you help, sir?" she choked out. Her teeth were clicking. She hated how weak she sounded. "Our tires busted. I've never used snow chains before." The man stood still for a beat, as if he was deciding what to be. Then he lifted a gloved hand, gave a thumbs up, and said, "Sure." In the darkness, Jane didn't notice what she might have noticed in daylight. She didn't see the unnatural stillness of his chest, how no breath fogged the air in front of him. She didn't make out the paleness of his eyes or the hollowness in his cheeks. She saw a stranger with a working vehicle and a word that sounded like help. He walked with her back to the Toyota. Freddie stayed in the passenger seat, stiff and silent, eyes still flicking toward the fuel gauge. Jane tried to signal him to lean away from the window. She didn't want him to stare. She didn't want him to see too much, because something about the man's posture made her skin prickle, even through the relief. The man crouched by the flat tire. From the ambulance headlights, he could see the chain mess and the rim pressed down into snow. He glanced at the other wheel, checking, and his voice came back steady. "You did this tire second? No problems there?" Jane blinked, surprised. "First, actually," she said. "I thought I'd done a crappy job." "Not at all," the man answered, and again his voice seemed normal enough, like he'd practiced being normal. "You've got a spare on the back. It won't be perfect, and I doubt it's made for this, but drive slow. There's a truck stop not far from here." Jane felt her shoulders loosen just a fraction. "Thanks," she said, and for the first time she let herself believe they might survive the night. "I've got a flashlight in the car. You want it?" "Yes," he said. "And a jack, and a wheel lock, if you have one." She hurried to the back of the Toyota and opened it, digging through what little they'd brought. That was when the ambulance lights caught Freddie's shape in the front seat more clearly. The man's head angled slightly, almost like he was registering the boy as a detail he hadn't noticed before. Jane saw it and felt a small rush of protective fear. She shut the back door, grabbed the flashlight and tools, and brought them over. "Want me to hold the light?" she asked. The man shook his head. "Leave it there. Go get yourself warm," he said. "Those jeans will freeze soon." Jane gave a humorless laugh. "These are the only pants I brought." The man didn't laugh back. He lowered his head toward the tire and muttered something that Jane didn't catch. It sounded like a private thought slipping out by accident. Up close, his gloves looked old, stained, stiff in places. When he turned the tire iron, Jane heard metal strain and something else, like a faint, wet creak that made her stomach tighten. She told herself she was imagining it. Cold made sounds weird. Snow made everything feel wrong. "What should I call you?" she asked, mostly to fill the silence. "Ernest?" he said. He didn't ask her name. He worked faster than she expected, even with the chains tangled. Jane watched, half in awe and half in that strange, wary state where gratitude and fear exist together. Every few seconds she glanced toward Freddie, still sitting inside, trusting her. That trust hurt. It felt heavy, like a responsibility she couldn't afford to drop. While Ernest worked, Jane's mind drifted back to the months before this, to the rumors that had started creeping around right before Freddie went back to school. People whispered that the government had a reason for Louisville, that the strike wasn't about war at all, that something had been there, something the public wasn't supposed to see. At first, the stories were vague and easy to dismiss. Then news stations realized viewers doubled when they leaned into horror. They started collecting details like trophies, broadcasting them with serious faces and dramatic music. Police records were hard to find, of course, but radio chatter from that night leaked out. Interviews with 911 operators described screams so intense the call handlers couldn't sleep afterward. Paramedics and cops had entered the area and never returned, and more units were requested until the requests themselves sounded desperate. One report, the clearest one, came from an operator who stayed on the line with a man who swore he had emptied his revolver into someone's chest, and the person didn't slow down at all. Then came September, and a storm over Louisville that blew south into Tennessee. The sky opened over Carthage. People reported rain that stung their skin, rain that made them itch and burn. And after that, things that sounded like movies began showing up in real life. Rotting people crawling out of water, moving wrong, hungry in a way nothing human should be. Jane told herself those were just stories. She told herself they weren't real. But the fear stuck anyway. It stuck so hard that when the phone company raised the price of a call and said it was because of staffing issues and poisoned water from the Cumberland River, Jane didn't believe the explanation. She believed what she'd heard on the radio when she thought Freddie wasn't listening. By the time Ernest finished changing the tire and reattaching the chains, his movements had become slightly stiff. He straightened slowly, like his joints didn't want to cooperate. Jane smiled at him, her gratitude real. "You've done a great thing for me and Freddie," she said. "Thank you." Ernest stood behind her, keeping a careful distance, as if closeness might reveal too much. Jane stared at the ambulance, and something clicked in her mind. The license plate was from Kentucky. "You're not from around here, are you, Ernest?" she asked quietly. "No," he said. "And you're not a paramedic either," she added, and turned so the headlights lit his face fully. In that bright beam, the truth hit her all at once. His skin was wrong, too pale in places, too tight, too sunken. His eyes looked cloudy, like milk. His cheekbones were sharp, his mouth too still. And the worst part wasn't any single detail. It was the fact that he didn't look alive in the way living people look alive. He looked like a body pretending. Ernest's voice roughened. "I was a trucker," he said. "The ambulance was convenient, useful supplies." Jane tried to hold her fear in her throat, to swallow it down. She thought of Freddie watching through the window. She thought of the miles of empty tundra. She forced her face into something like calm. "And nobody back home reported it stolen?" she asked, trying to sound tough. trying to make it a conversation instead of a scream. Ernest's head tilted slightly. No one it'd be a priority for. Jane drew a breath, and for a split second her pity tried to rise. Maybe he had lost everyone. Maybe the world really was breaking. She said, "That must have been horrible. I'm sorry for whatever you've lost. But you really helped us tonight." Ernest's mouth twitched. Something dark moved behind his expression, like a thought taking control. In his head, an idea sharpened into certainty. They don't expect the dead to talk. She doesn't notice the rot. She thinks I'm just a man in the dark. Jane stepped closer and gave him a gentle thump on the arm through his jacket. A casual thank you touch, the kind people do when they want to show warmth. She didn't understand what she had just offered him. The jacket tore as his hand shot out. Freddie screamed from inside the car. Jane's whole body went rigid as Ernest grabbed her hair and yanked her head toward his mouth with strength that didn't belong to a human being. She fought, but it didn't matter. The cold made her slow. Panic made her clumsy. The force behind Ernest was simple and brutal. Jane felt the first tearing pain at her scalp, felt roots rip, felt her body flail without control. Snow rushed up into her vision as she stumbled. Then his teeth found her head. The bite wasn't like a normal bite. It was hungry and violent and final. She felt pressure, then heat, then something she couldn't explain as her senses collapsed into red. Ernest ate as if he had been starving for years. The sound was wet and cracking. Black blood spilled onto white snow in thick drops. Jane's body twitched and jerked, nerves firing useless signals into a world that didn't care. The last clear thing she felt was a kind of distant shock, like she was hearing her own end from far away. And then she was gone. For a moment, Ernest sank over her with a strange kind of relief. Bliss moved through his dead body like warmth, like being young again, like relief from an agony that had been chewing him from the inside. He kept digging until there was nothing left worth calling a person. Only an emptied face and soaked hair and broken bone on the snow. Then the feeling faded. The pain began to return. Real thought began to return, too. And with it came the cold reality that he was still what he was. Freddie had watched everything. Fear didn't make him rush forward. It glued him in place at first, as if his body refused to accept what his eyes had seen. When he finally moved, it was like snapping out of a trance. He looked at the pedals and the stick in the center console and realized he didn't know how to make the car go. He wasn't old enough to drive. He didn't even know what the third pedal did, the one he'd seen Frank and Jane press. He didn't know how to release the brake. He didn't know anything except that he had to get away. He made the only choice he could. The passenger door slammed open and the sound echoed across the tundra. Ernest lifted his head, turning toward it. Freddie's hat bobbed in the headlights as the boy ran into the night. Ernest looked down at Jane's body and felt nothing like regret. Not anymore. The hunger had numbed that part long ago, but the release was fading, and the pain was creeping back up his arms, into his shoulders, into the dead space where his chest should have felt breath. Freddie ran fast at first, driven by pure panic, but his shoes were Air Jordans, not boots. Snow pushed into them, melted, refroze. His feet went numb so quickly it scared him more than the dark. Ernest did not chase right away. He moved like a man with time. He dragged Jane's remains to the back of the ambulance and dropped her there. Then he walked back, carefully collecting pieces from the snow shards of skull, anything that might leave a trail. His movements were disturbingly practical, like he'd done this many times. Freddie kept running. The road was icy but firm under the snow. In the distance, the ambulance doors opened with a metallic groan. Freddie turned his head at the sound and slipped. He landed hard on his shoulder. Pain exploded through him, brighter than anything he'd ever felt. He bit down on his scream, forcing it back because screaming felt like calling a predator. Tears blurred his vision, but he got up anyway, shaking, and kept moving. Behind him, Ernest pulled out a dolly and laid a stretcher on the road. He unzipped a body bag and rolled what was left of Jane inside with the same careful efficiency. He looked almost annoyed at the sight of old organs and overused flesh, as if even death could become inconvenient. Freddy's world narrowed into two things: the road ahead and the sound behind him. The tundra felt endless. To one side, a wall of rock rose up, blocking any path. To the other side was open darkness that could have been flat ground or a drop into nothing. Freddy didn't have his mother's instincts. He didn't know how to gamble with terrain. He only knew how to run forward. The ambulance engine roared to life. It rolled past the Toyota, still running with its newly changed tire, snow chains fixed, and the passenger door wide open like a mouth. If a ranger came by in the morning, it would look like another stupid story. Someone ran out of gas and walked into the night. Another fool in the north. Freddy ran harder. His breath burned. His legs felt heavy. The headlights behind him grew brighter, closing the distance slowly, steadily. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He couldn't understand it. Jane had told him God was protecting them. They had made it through Wyoming. The roads had been clear. Border Patrol hadn't even been there. Why would God stop now? He slipped again and fell, softer this time, but when his face hit the cold ground, he couldn't hold it in anymore. He screamed. It was the kind of scream that should bring adults running, a scream built into human DNA as an emergency signal. But there were no adults. There was only tundra and snow and the sound of an engine. Then something strange happened. The ambulance didn't slam to a stop beside him, and the doors didn't fly open. Ernest didn't rush him. Instead, the ambulance stopped at a distance and idled. Ernest sat behind the wheel like a man waiting for a traffic light. His hands loosened on the steering wheel. Then he reached into a case and pulled out a vial and a needle. Calm as a doctor, he injected morphine into his veins and wondered briefly how many injections a body could take when the holes never healed. He needed it. Not for the boy, for himself, for the pain. Freddy got up again, shaking, and kept running. Ernest kept pace in the ambulance. Not speeding up, not slowing down, letting the boy burn his strength away. He knew a kid that age couldn't keep this up long. He didn't even have to wait for frostbite to do the work. A quarter-mile later, Freddy collapsed again. This time, there was no scream, just quiet sobbing, the kind that comes when you stop believing in rescue. Ernest opened the door and stepped out. His boots were made for ice. He walked toward Freddy without urgency, as if this was already decided. Freddy felt a hand grab the back of his coat. He lifted off the road, legs kicking, arms swinging uselessly. He hit Ernest's arm with his fists, but it was like punching a pole. The ambulance's back doors opened and Freddy's knees smashed the bumper as he was shoved inside. The doors swung shut with a final metal slam. The ambulance moved again. Inside, the light was a sick yellow from old ceiling strips. The ride was rough. A sharp turn threw Freddy against the dolly, and it slammed into the rear doors with a loud bang. Something heavy shifted beside him. The black body bag slid slightly, and from the partially open zipper, a tuft of thick, blood-soaked hair protruded. Freddy saw it and made a sound that didn't even feel like it came from him. A scream ripped out, pure and helpless. From the driver's compartment, Ernest heard the chaos. The boy slamming into walls, sobbing, trying to change anything by force. The screams cut into Ernest's ears, but he didn't flinch. He slowed to a crawl, trying to think of what might calm him, because part of him understood a screaming boy could cause problems, break things, hurt himself, make noise that attracted others. Freddy's throat finally gave out. The screaming turned into raw sobbing. Then the radio crackled. A voice came through, distorted by distance and age, and something dead behind it. "You hear me?" Freddy sucked in a sharp breath. Hope hit him like a punch. If there was a radio, there might be someone else. Someone listening. Someone real. "If it makes you feel better," the voice continued, dragging certain words out oddly, "I'll do everything I can to make sure you survive this." Ernest swished salt water in his mouth, took his finger off the mic for a second. And when he spoke again, there was something almost like regret. "I'm sorry, Freddie. I really am." Freddie's hands shook. He hit the radio housing with his fists, and in the chaos, he knocked a switch by accident. "How can you be sorry?" he screamed into the mic. "After what you did?" Ernest stared at the road, eyes narrowed against the snow. "It's not that simple," he muttered, not even sure if the boy heard it. Freddie paused, and when he spoke again, his voice sounded confused, almost softer. "Not that simple?" Maybe he hadn't seen what he thought. Maybe his mother wasn't. Maybe the body bag meant something different. He stepped away from the radio, drawn toward the zipper like a magnet. From the front, Ernest heard it, the unmistakable sound of a zipper moving. "No, Freddie, don't," Ernest shouted. And for the first time, fear sharpened his dead voice. Freddie opened it anyway. His mother's eyes stared up at the ceiling, swollen and bloody, pointing in different directions. Hair was stuck across her face. Where her skull should have been whole, there was a dark hole, wide and empty, like something had scooped out everything that mattered. Freddie didn't scream this time. His face went strange. His hands moved like he was trying to erase what he saw but couldn't. And then, even worse, he felt his mouth twitch. A smile tried to form. Not because he was happy, because something in his mind broke and searched for any shape it could take. Ernest drove on, jaw tight. Tiny fragments of bone were still on his clothes. Soft matter stuck between his teeth. He had run out of guilt a long time ago, but the boy's quiet was different from screaming. Screaming was noise. Quiet grief was weight. "Can you bring her back?" Freddie asked, suddenly clear, almost calm. "No," Ernest said. "I thought that's what happens now," Freddie pushed. "Is it the brain? Is it something with the brain?" Ernest swallowed, feeling the lie and truth tangled together. It was about the brain, just not in a way that would help. "No," he said carefully. "It's not like that. I don't really understand it." Freddie's voice rose. "How can you not know? It happened to you." Ernest's tone tightened. "I ain't been dead that long. I woke up in a box. Didn't know the day, didn't know the year. I just knew I had to get out, and I knew I needed something to stop it hurting." Freddie went still. "It hurts to be dead?" Ernest didn't answer right away, but the silence was enough. Then he spoke, low and honest in a way that made it worse, like nothing else. "It takes you over. It feels like you can't do anything about it until you get hold of someone. Then it stops for a while. You're you for a while. But it ain't the brain that puts you down. I saw a guy get buckshot through the middle of his forehead. Didn't slow him." Freddie's voice snapped back into anger. "So you can bring her back. You can do it. Make her like you." "I wouldn't do that to her," Ernest barked. "I couldn't do that to anyone. And besides, I don't know if getting shot in the head changes it. And your mom ain't got a brain left." He exploded in the back of the ambulance, throwing things, kicking, knocking over trays. Glass broke, pills scattered across the floor, ampoules shattered and rolled under the dolly. Everything moved except the body bag, which sat there like a black fact. Ernest let him. Snow was coming down harder now. The road ahead was a tunnel of white. Miles passed, then the radio crackled again, smaller now, exhausted. "Who were you?" Freddie asked. "Who are you, I guess?" "My name was Ernest," he replied. "I was a trucker. I knew these roads." His voice trembled. "Are you dead?" Ernest actually smiled a little, because the question was almost normal. "You're the first person to ask me that," he said, trying to sound gentle. Freddie whispered under his breath, almost too quiet, "Because you killed everyone before they could." Ernest didn't respond. He might not have heard, or he might have chosen not to. "I don't know," Ernest said instead. "I know for certain I was. Now I've got every symptom except I can still talk." "How did you die?" Freddie asked. "Smoking," Ernest said. "Loved it on long drives. Cigarette, coffee, maybe a steak. Even the word terminal. didn't stop me. Not even Cindy's tears. Who was Cindy? My wife? Ernest replied, then hesitated. Might still be, I guess. She dead too? I hope not, Ernest said, and something sharp flashed through his voice. Thinking about her hurt in a way that wasn't physical, he tried to change direction. I tried a cigarette after all this started. Didn't do anything. Just felt rough. He realized too late he was explaining addiction to a child, but Freddie didn't care. His mind was somewhere else now, stuck between fear and numbness. Were you scared to die? Freddie asked. Oh yeah, Ernest answered. The line went quiet. Freddie's breathing came through the radio, tight and held back, as if he was trying not to make any sound at all. Ernest spoke again, almost like a man telling a bedtime story because he didn't know what else to do. There was this idea, some old Greek guy. He said, nobody experiences death. You're alive or you're not, and once you're not, there's nothing bad to feel. Freddie inhaled sharply, anger returning. What do you mean there's nothing? My mom's not nothing. God loves us. She's not gone. Of course, he said, forcing the words. I'm sorry. Sorry? Freddie's voice cracked. You killed her, and now you're saying she's nothing. I didn't mean she's nothing, Ernest said, struggling. I don't remember heaven, that's all. Freddie knew then that Ernest was lying. In a child's simple logic, nobody who had seen heaven would ever want to leave it. That meant Ernest hadn't been there, and that meant something else. Hill spat you out, Freddie said, voice low and poisonous. You're a bad person. Nobody loved you. Cindy probably hated you. Ernest's hands tightened on the wheel. He could see a sign ahead through thinning snow. A truck stop. The neon wasn't lit. The place looked dark and abandoned. His pain surged, not just in his hand, but up his arm, spreading like fire under dead skin. Bad feelings made it worse. The boy's words had found something inside him that still worked. You should stop, boy, Ernest said, and his voice finally sounded fully dead. Freddie heard it and understood he had hit the nerve. Like the day he'd made a racist teacher lose control with one sentence, he realized he could still hurt someone who couldn't be hurt the normal way. I bet you enjoy it, he spat. You do it because it's fun. Ernest slammed the brakes. Freddie flew forward and smashed his shoulder into the wall. A hard thud hit his back at the same time as the body bag slid on the dolly and bumped him. Pain ripped through him, and he screamed again, high and broken. Get out, Ernest's voice came through the radio, flat and shaking with rage. Freddie tried to push himself up, but slipped in something warm on the floor. It took him a second to realize what it was. Blood. His mother's blood, smeared and clotting from the bag, shifting. His stomach rolled. His throat locked. No scream came out this time. He couldn't. I said, get out. Ernest barked again. Freddie got to his feet. He stared at the rear doors, disbelieving, then stumbled to them. He expected them to be locked, because prisoners are locked. But when he grabbed the handles, they opened easily, as if he had never been a prisoner at all, as if he was just another guest being told to leave. He jumped down into the snow. For a moment, he just walked forward into darkness. Then he looked up and saw the truck stop about 100 yards away. The neon sign was off, but the glass caught faint light and twinkled like ice. Behind him, Ernest sat in the ambulance, gripping the wheel so hard his gloves creaked. He watched the boy move away, slow and unsteady, and the hunger in him rose like a tide. The boy was the one thing that could stop the pain for a while. He knew it. He hated that he knew it. Freddie reached the door, his hands barely feeling the handle. He turned it. It moved smoothly, too smoothly, like it wasn't locked at all. He pushed hard, but the heavy wooden door didn't budge. His knees gave out. He collapsed onto frosty gravel and let despair finally swallow him. The cold pressed into his clothes. His breath came out in short bursts. Everything felt finished. Then the door opened from the other side. Warm light spilled out, soft and golden, and for one impossible second, Freddie just stared at it like it was a miracle. Behind him, the ambulance engine revved. He turned his head in panic, expecting headlights to surge forward. expecting Ernest to change his mind. Instead, the ambulance pulled away, rolling off into the pale morning light, like it had decided to leave the story unfinished. Freddie sat in the gravel, shaking, staring at the open doorway and trying to understand why the monster had let him live. Story 2. The red alert was still pulsing, but it didn't feel sharp anymore. It was like seeing it through fog, like the light was far away and his eyes couldn't focus. Hector tried to understand what had just happened. There had been an explosion, not a small one, a violent station-shaking blast that threw him down the corridor like he was nothing. He remembered the impact, the way his body had slammed into the wall, and then the pain, massive, total pain, like every nerve had caught fire at once. And then the pain stopped, not faded, not eased, just gone, as if someone flipped a switch. Hector! A voice screamed his name from the other side of the hatch. It sounded muffled, distorted by the thick door and the emergency systems. Hector tried to answer, tried to yell back that he was okay, that he was right here. His mouth moved. He could feel himself forcing the words out. But nobody reacted. The hatch opened. Boots pounded on the metal floor. 2 crew members rushed in, faces pale under the harsh red lighting. For a second, Hector felt relief so strong it almost made him dizzy. They were here, they saw him, they'd help him. Then they ran straight through him, not brushed past him, not bumped him, through him like he was smoke. They didn't even slow down. They didn't even flinch. Hector froze. His brain tried to turn it into something familiar, something safe. He thought of those dumb horror comedies where ghosts make jokes and wave their hands through people and everyone screams in a goofy way. For a split second, he wanted to laugh because the alternative felt impossible. Then he followed their eyes. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at the floor, at his body. His body lay twisted in the corridor under the pulsing red light, one arm bent wrong. His helmet had rolled away. His eyes were half open, staring blankly at the ceiling. He was looking at himself the way you look at a mannequin that fell over. A thought formed slowly, like his mind was moving through glue. I'm dead. He drifted closer, not walking exactly, more like sliding without effort. There was a faint burn smell in the air. Wires had been torn open by the blast and the insulation had melted in places. The warning system kept screaming about pressure loss and electrical damage. He saw what had probably killed him. It could have been the electrical shock, the moment the damaged line arced and found him. Or it could have been the screwdriver. He had been carrying it when the blast hit. It had spun through the air like a thrown weapon and ended its flight in his neck. He stared at it, trying to feel something. Nausea, horror, pain. Nothing came in the normal way. He felt detached, as if the part of him that reacted had been left behind inside the broken body on the floor. There had been a warning earlier about a leak. They'd rushed repairs because the schedule was tight and nobody wanted to lose another day. Now he was dead because of a leak and bad timing. What a stupid way to go. The fuck dumb. He corrected himself automatically, the way he always did when he caught his own thoughts sounding too polite. He was an astronaut on Mars. That had been his childhood dream since he was a kid staring at grainy photos in science books. Even when he'd made peace with the fact that this mission was basically a one-way ticket, he wasn't ready for it to end like this. Not yet. Not on a random repair job in a hallway with an alarm screaming overhead. The crew worked for hours after the explosion, moving with the careful speed of people forced to be calm. They sealed sections, checked air pressure, isolated the damaged power lines. They wrapped his body. They spoke in low voices that broke now and then. Hector watched them because there was nothing else to do. At first, he waited for something to happen to him. A pull, a tunnel, a bright light, a voice. Some clear sign that the universe had a plan for what came after. He hovered near them as they sat together later in the common area, exhausted, faces hollow, talking about what to tell Mission Control in the morning. They said his name in a way that made it feel heavier than it ever had when he was alive. One of them mentioned his wife back on Earth, and a cold feeling ran through Hector even though he wasn't sure he could still feel cold the same way. His wife would break. There were no good words for that kind of message. There was just damage spreading outward across the people who loved you. Then another thought hit him. Wait, if I'm still here, does that mean I can go back? Could he get on the return ship when it launched? Could a soul ride inside a capsule? Could he drift along like a stowaway made of static? And if he could do that, what would he even be on Earth? A presence? A whisper? A shadow his wife felt in the bedroom at night? He wasn't religious. He never had been. He'd always believed in physics, engineering, math, things you could test. But now, standing in the same room as his living crewmates while they didn't see him, he couldn't deny that something like a soul existed. Which brought another thought, darker than the rest. If there's a soul, then maybe there's punishment too. Maybe he was waiting to be dragged somewhere. He surprised himself by hoping for the mercy of a God he'd never believed in. Not because he had suddenly become faithful, but because fear makes you reach for anything. Hours passed. The crew eventually slept. Hector didn't. He realized he couldn't. He didn't feel tired. He didn't even feel time moving the way it used to. Minutes and hours blurred together, all of it measured only by the rotating patterns of the station's lights and the sound of life support systems pushing air through metal lungs. He sat in the common area, staring at a wall panel as if it might open and reveal an answer. Seriously, what now? If there was a system for the afterlife, this felt like the moment it should show up. If there were guides or angels or whatever people called them, they were late. If there was a door, he couldn't see it. If there was a path, it was hidden. At some point, he noticed something else. He wasn't alone. At first, it was just a feeling, like being watched. Then it became sound, barely there. A faint shifting from the darkest corner of the habitat module, where the red emergency lighting didn't fully reach. The shadows seemed thicker there, like they absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. Hector turned toward the darkness. Nothing moved, yet he felt it. A presence. More than one. His instinct was to hide, even though he didn't know what hiding meant anymore. If something had come to take him to hell, or whatever the Mars version of hell was, he didn't want to help it by announcing himself. But then another thought argued back, if something from hell was real, wouldn't it already know where he was? He spoke anyway, loud enough that the sound echoed strangely in the empty module. Who's there? His voice didn't sound normal. It didn't carry through the air the same way. It felt like it vibrated through the structure, through the metal, through something that wasn't air at all. The sound was thin, like the idea of speech rather than speech itself. Something knocked at the window, a sharp tap on thick glass. Hector froze and looked toward the small observation window that faced the Martian landscape. Outside was darkness, the kind of darkness you get without streetlights, without atmosphere, without anything familiar. It was absolute. For a moment he saw nothing. Then he saw a shift, like a shadow moving against a darker shadow. Something was out there. Not one thing, multiple. He couldn't see details in the night, but he could feel movement, like figures pacing in the distance, circling. He backed away instinctively, though he wasn't sure his feet even touched the floor. When the Martian morning came, he was still there. No bright gate, no pit of fire, no voice telling him where to go. Just the station, a sleeping crew, and a growing frustration that turned into fear. With the daylight, visibility outside improved. The red desert stretched out flat and endless, the sky pale and thin. Now he could see them. Creatures. Not many at first, but enough that his stomach tightened even without a stomach. They moved across the red tundra in slow, steady patterns, as if they'd been walking forever and would keep walking forever. Some were low and crawling. Some were taller, wrong-limbed, not quite matching any animal logic Hector understood. Their shapes looked like nightmares that had learned how to stand. They didn't rush. They wandered. They lingered near the station like curious scavengers. Hector wanted to warn the crew. He wanted to shake them awake and tell them not to go outside, not to do their survey trips, not to treat this planet like it was empty just because it looked empty. But he couldn't reach them. His words didn't land in their ears. He could scream and they would continue sleeping, their faces relaxed, safe behind thick walls and locked hatches. When they woke, they did what living people always do. They turned grief into tasks. They followed procedure. They recorded data. They ate what they could stomach. They prepared their morning message to Earth. Hector watched them record the report about his death. Hearing his name spoken into a camera felt strange, like watching his own obituary being written in real time. The way they talked about him was warm, even loving. It should have comforted him. Instead, it made him think about how quickly people forget. Not because they're cruel, but because life keeps moving. A few months, a few years, and he would become a line in a documentary, a photo in a slideshow, a name people said once a year on some Memorial Day. He wasn't the first astronaut to die. He wouldn't be the last. Then the day came when the crew decided to go outside for a local geological survey. Hector followed them to the airlock. He didn't try to pass through solid walls. He wasn't sure he could. And even if he could, the thought of melting through metal like some movie ghost made him feel stupid. He stayed close, moving through the open spaces like a person would. The inner hatch opened. The crew stepped into the airlock in their suits, checking seals and tether points. Hector stepped in too. It was strange, being in that confined space with them and feeling nothing of what he used to feel. No temperature shift, no breath fogging the visor. His old reflex made him want to hold his breath when the outer door cycled, as if he still needed oxygen. There was no breath to hold. The outer hatch opened, and they stepped onto Mars. Hector stepped out with them. The Martian surface felt unreal without a suit. Not because it was cold or because the air was thin, but because none of that mattered to him anymore. He was present without being physical, walking through a world that should have killed him in seconds when he was alive. He watched the crew move toward the rover. That's when he saw a dark shadow in the distance, drifting closer to the vehicle. It moved slowly, cautiously, like it was studying the rover the way an animal studies a trap. Other creatures lingered farther back, their heads, or whatever passed for heads, tilting as they observed the humans. They looked obsessed, not with the people exactly, but with human things. The rover, the tools, the motion, as if they were trying to understand what these objects meant and whether they could be used. Hector's attention shifted when he realized something worse. Some of them were noticing him. A few of the creatures stopped wandering and turned, not toward the living crew, but toward the empty space where Hector stood. Their movements changed. They became purposeful. Their slow drifting became a quiet convergence. Hector felt something like dread bloom inside him. No, not me. He backed away, but they continued. They began to spread out, surrounding him, closing in like black insects crawling over the red ground. Up close, they looked even more wrong. Their surfaces weren't fur or skin the way he understood it. They looked like layered shadow and dust, with edges that didn't stay still. Their shapes kept shifting slightly, as if their bodies were made of unstable thought, they whispered. Not with mouths, exactly. The sound seemed to push directly into the space around him. It was a language he didn't understand, full of clicking tones and long, low vibrations that made the hairless surface of his new existence feel like it was trembling. He turned and ran toward the station, toward the open hatch. He tried to pass through the wall. He couldn't. He hit something invisible and strong, like a field of pressure. Not a solid surface, but a barrier that pushed back. It felt like grabbing an electric fence with your whole body, except he didn't feel pain. He felt disruption, like his shape was being torn at the edges. Then it clicked. The walls of the structure were full of electricity, power lines, shielding, grounding systems. The entire habitat was an engineered machine humming with current. And he wasn't flesh anymore. He was energy, or something close to it. The station wasn't just shelter. It was a cage. The creatures reached him. One grabbed at him, and he felt that same disruption, like static ripping through static. Another pressed close, and for a moment Hector's sense of self blurred, as if the thing was trying to pull him apart and see what he was made of. It was damn weird and terrifying in a way that didn't need pain to be real. He kept moving, desperate, circling until the crew finished their task and began heading back. When the inner hatch opened, he slipped into the airlock with them, relieved to be back inside the structure's boundary, even if it trapped him. But he wasn't fast enough. The crew cycled through the first door and sealed it behind them. Hector was still in the airlock, stuck. He turned toward the small airlock window and saw the creatures outside, gathered near the outer hatch, watching him with stillness that felt intelligent. They didn't look angry, they looked patient, like they had all the time in the world. Hector swallowed, out of habit more than need. He knew that the next time the outer door opened, if he was still there, those things would come for him. Then, without warning, the whispering changed. Even though he couldn't understand the language, something else happened. Something that made his entire awareness tighten. Images formed in front of him. Not on the glass, not like a screen. In the air inside his perception, as if thoughts had been projected directly into him. He realized with a sick twist that being whatever he was now meant he could see ideas the way he used to see objects. They were showing him something. A story. Natives of the dark, wandering Mars long before humans arrived. And then another image. A craft crashing on the far side of the planet. Long ago. Not modern. Something older, half buried in dust. A crew that never made it home. Their bodies died. Their souls stayed. Time passed. Centuries, maybe more. Those souls didn't rise to anything. They didn't get taken. They didn't get judged. They remained here until they changed. They thinned out, warped, grew hungry, grew wrong, until they were no longer human in any meaningful way. The creatures around him weren't just aliens. Some of them had once been people. Hector's mind latched onto one thought, the only one that mattered. "There's no afterlife?" he asked, his voice sounding small in the airlock. The creatures responded with another wave of thought, and within it was something like translation, an explanation shaped into terms he could hold. In his culture, Hector thought, there was the idea of the afterlife, heaven, hell, whatever version you were raised on. Hector had always treated it like a story people told themselves, so death wouldn't feel like a wall. But now he was dead, and he was still here, and the wall was behind him. In our culture, the message seemed to say, there are beings called the Atara. They guide souls to the next life. Hector latched onto the meaning. "We have that too," he said, almost desperate. "We call them reapers." "Exactly," came the answering thought, calm and certain. "But here is the truth. There are no reapers on Mars. They are only on Earth, and on worlds that are fully inhabited. Places where the living are many, where the path is maintained. You wait. You become something else. You are forgotten." Hector's mind stuttered on the word. Forgotten. He imagined it years passing while his wife aged, grieved, moved on because she had to. Decades passing until nobody living remembered his voice. His name turning into a footnote, then nothing. And him still here, still aware, still trapped under a sky that never offered him a door out. A soul with no destination. A ghost with no end. "Fuck," Hector said. And even though he had no lungs, the word came out like a final breath. He understood then that death wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was time. Time without an ending, stretching across the red desert forever, until his thoughts rotted and he became one more shape in the darkness outside, waiting for the next human to arrive and die and join them. Story 3. The others were happy the old man was retiring. Nobody said it out loud in a cruel way, at least not at first. They kept it polite, the way people do when they're relieved but don't want to look like they are. They signed the card. They shook his hand. A few of them even told him they'd miss him, though everyone knew that wasn't true in the way it matters. It wasn't that he'd been mean. He wasn't the type to pick fights or gossip or make anyone's day harder on purpose. He was just there day after day, like a piece of the building itself. He didn't chat in the break room. He didn't laugh at jokes. If someone asked him how his weekend was, he'd answer with something short that killed the conversation on impact. Fine, busy, same as always. He only ever talked about work, and even then he only said what he had to. If you asked him a question, he'd answer it, and his answer would be the smallest amount of language possible. Not rude, exactly, just empty. Like he didn't want words sticking to him. The younger employees didn't understand him. They called him creepy behind his back. The ones who'd been there longer had a different expression for it. They'd lower their voices and say the old man had been hollowed out. Old-timers said he'd had a family once. People always say that about the quiet ones, as if silence has to come from a tragedy. But in his case, there were details. Names got lost, but the shape of the story stayed the same. A wife, a little girl, a house outside town with a barn out back. A normal life, the kind that gives a person a reason to wake up. Then the rumors would shift, depending on who was telling it. Some said the wife ran off. Some said she didn't run so much as disappear. The most common version was that she left him and took their daughter, and that the old man came apart after that. But the rumors didn't end there, because there was a fire. People said his house burned down, late at night, fast. Hot enough that the neighbors could feel it from the road. Hot enough that the sky looked orange through the trees. There were different stories about how it started. Faulty wiring, a heater too close to curtains, a cigarette, a bad accident, a bad man. No official version ever seemed to stick in the workplace. The only part everyone agreed on was that the old man didn't show up to work for a month afterward. Then, one morning, he was back. He clocked in like nothing had happened. Same stiff posture, same slow movements, same plain clothes and worn boots. But the people who paid attention said his eyes were different, and not in a poetic way. He looked like a person who had seen the end of everything and decided to keep living anyway, not because he wanted to, but because something in him refused to stop. He didn't talk about the fire. He didn't talk about his wife or his daughter. If anyone tried to bring it up, his face would go blank in a way that made them stop. After that, people started saying he didn't live in a house anymore. They said he lived in his old barn. At first, it sounded like another rumor, the kind you make up about someone because mystery makes people uncomfortable. But there were little things that made it feel real. Mud on his boots even in dry weather. A smell of smoke that never fully left his clothes. Splinters in his hands. The fact that he always looked tired, even when he'd only just arrived. Nobody asked him directly. Nobody wanted to know for sure. So the story lived in the space where nobody had to prove it. When the retirement notice went up, there was an odd shift in the building. People were lighter, like a shadow had been scheduled to leave. A few joked about finally having a break room without that funeral vibe. Someone brought donuts. Someone else said, "Good for him," like it was a good thing when an old man disappeared from your daily view. He didn't participate in any of it. On his last day, he moved through his tasks in the same quiet way he always did. No speeches, no nostalgia, no lingering at anyone's desk. He worked. He checked things off his list. He put tools away with slow care. If anyone said, "Congrats," he nodded once. Toward the end of his shift, he stood by his locker and did something small that caught a coworker's eye. He took his keychain out and removed almost all the keys. There were many of them. Too many for a person who supposedly lived in a barn. Brass keys, silver keys, a few that were old enough to look almost black. Keys to cabinets, keys to gates, keys with worn ridges from years of use. One by one, he slid them off the ring. He didn't do it like someone cleaning up. He did it like someone choosing. In the end, there was only one key left. He stared at it for a long moment, holding it between his fingers, as if it weighed more than it should. Then he slipped it into his pocket and closed his hand over it tight. Someone who knew him better than most, an older maintenance tech who'd worked alongside him for years, said quietly that the old man hated Tuesdays. He'd always hated them. He'd never explained why. The tech used to think it was just an old man's superstition, some silly hatred of a day of the week. But this Tuesday wasn't just any Tuesday. This Tuesday marked the end. Near closing time, the old man walked to the time clock. He stood there a second, looking at it, not sentimental, not sad, just steady. He slid his card through like he'd done thousands of times, clocked out. Then he left. No lingering in the doorway, no turning back, no final glance at the building that had eaten his life for decades. The door shut behind him, and that was that. A few people watched through the glass, waiting for him to slow down, maybe to realize he was being watched. He didn't. He walked across the parking lot with the same stiff, purposeful steps, climbed into his vehicle, and drove away. He didn't go home, not right away. First, he stopped at a store. It wasn't a big place, just one of those shops that sells a mix of things. Cheap toys, greeting cards, candles, seasonal decorations, little gifts you buy when you don't know what else to do. The kind of store where the lighting is too bright and the music is too cheerful. The old man moved through the aisles like he'd been there before, even if he hadn't. He didn't browse aimlessly. He went straight to the toys. His fingers hovered over stuffed animals and plastic dolls and little boxed sets meant to make children smile. His face did something strange there. Not warmth exactly, not joy, more like concentration, like he was trying to remember a specific kind of happiness and couldn't quite reach it. He chose a toy carefully, then held it in his hands a moment longer than necessary. Then he walked to the candle aisle. He picked up several, not just one, plain ones, thick ones that could burn for hours. He studied the labels like he cared about the scent. But in the end, he chose the simplest kind. White candles, nothing fancy, practical. Because the candles weren't for mood, they were for darkness. His daughter had been terrified of the dark. That was the thing people at work never knew, the detail that sat behind his silence like a locked room. His little girl used to wake up screaming at night. She would cry until her throat hurt. He would sit beside her bed and talk softly until she calmed down. He would leave the hallway light on, the closet cracked open, the nightlight glowing. The dark made her panic, and as she grew older, the fear didn't leave the way people always say childhood fears do. It got worse. And the woman, his wife, the girl's mother, couldn't stand it. In his head, he still thought of her as the disappointing woman. Not because she didn't live up to some romantic dream, but because she had disappointed something basic in him, something human. She had taken the most vulnerable part of their home and treated it like an inconvenience. The old man remembered how she would snap at the girl. "Stop it. You're too old for this. Go back to sleep." Then the snapping turned into shouting. Then the shouting turned into hitting. He remembered the sound of it as clearly as he remembered the sound of fire. A slap, a thud, a child choking back sobs, trying not to make noise because making noise made it worse. He told himself he should have stopped it sooner, that he should have taken the girl and left, that he should have done something big and final. But his life had been made of small hesitations, and small hesitations can kill people just as surely as violence can. When the woman left, part of him had felt relief. When she was gone, the house was quiet. When she was gone, at least the girl wouldn't be hit anymore. He told himself that was enough to call it a good thing, even if the rest of him had collapsed. Now, driving away from the store with the toy and the candles on the passenger seat, he felt the same tight excitement build behind his ribs. It didn't feel like happiness, but it wasn't grief either. It was anticipation, the kind of feeling you get when something you've wanted for a long time is finally close enough to touch. He turned off the main roads. The town thinned out. Streetlights became rare. Houses sat farther apart, their windows dark. The world outside his windshield became trees and open fields, and the long empty stretch of a road that didn't need a name because hardly anyone used it. When he finally pulled in, there was no proper driveway anymore. Just tire marks and dead grass. The barn rose in the distance like a shadow against the night. The house behind it was a black shape, a skeleton of what it used to be. Even after all this time, you could still see where the fire had bitten into it, where the roof had collapsed, where the structure had been reduced to something that looked more like a memory than a building. He parked close to the barn and sat in the vehicle for a moment without turning off the engine. He listened to it idle. He listened to his own breathing. His hands rested on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. Then he turned the key, and the engine died. The silence afterward felt thick. He picked up the bag with the toy and the candles and got out. The air smelled like old wood and soil and distant smoke that didn't exist anymore but still lived in the grain of things. The barn door waited, half hidden in shadow, the hinges quietly rusted, the wood swollen from years of weather. He walked to it with the key in his pocket, his fingers wrapped around it like a talisman. The key turned smoothly in the lock, like it had been used recently, like it hadn't been waiting for decades. The old man pulled the door open just enough to slip through, then closed it behind him. Inside, it was cool and dry. Dust floated in the thin light that leaked through cracks in the wood. The smell hit him immediately, earth and wax and something faintly sweet that shouldn't have been there. He reached for the chain lock and slid it into place from the inside. The metal clicked, and the sound felt final. For a moment he stood there, eyes adjusting. Then he walked deeper into the barn. There was a space cleared out, not like an animal stall, but like a room someone had built inside a bigger room. The floor changed there. The boards looked newer, or at least better cared for. And in the center, under the soft flicker of candlelight that had been left burning, was a bed. Not a normal bed. The bed sat on a mound of dirt, raised like a small hill. The soil looked packed down, shaped carefully, as if someone had piled it there by hand and then smoothed it. It was wrong to see a bed like that, wrong in a way that made the mind try to refuse it. Beds belonged outside. But he had made it this way, and he had made it for a reason. A girl was lying on it. She looked peaceful. If you glanced quickly, you might think she was asleep. Her hair lay neatly around her head. Her hands were folded. Her chest didn't rise and fall, but in the candlelight, the stillness looked gentle, like a pause. The old man's steps slowed as he approached, not out of fear, but out of reverence. He set the bag down carefully, then pulled the toy out and held it up, studying it as if seeking approval from someone who couldn't speak. He placed it beside her. It wasn't the first toy there. There were many, arranged around her like offerings. Stuffed animals with worn fur, dolls with brushed hair, little gifts that looked like they'd been bought over the years and placed here one by one, a pile that had grown slowly, patiently, as if time didn't matter as long as the ritual continued. He took out the candles next. His hands shook slightly as he set them up. He lit them one at a time, the wicks catching with a soft sputter. Each flame steadied, then stood tall, pushing back the shadows. His daughter had been afraid of the dark, and he couldn't stand the idea of her being alone in it. That thought tightened his throat, and for a moment he imagined her as she used to be, small, alive, clutching a blanket, eyes huge. He imagined her whispering, "Daddy, don't leave." He smiled then, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile that came from a place in him that had been twisted into something hard. His eyes drifted to the mound of dirt under the bed, and his mind, without permission, went back to the disappointing woman again. He remembered her face, her voice, the sharp sound of her anger. He remembered how she had looked at their child like she was a problem to be solved. He told himself again that he was glad she was gone. The thought brought him comfort, and that comfort made him feel steady. He looked back down at the girl's face. The burns were not raw anymore. Once there had been a time when he couldn't look at her without feeling like he was being split open. The fire had marked her, and for a long time the memory of it had been unbearable. But time had done what time does. The flesh had changed. The damage had settled into a different kind of shape. In the candlelight, she looked older now. Not in a way that made sense, not in a way a living child grows. But there was a strange maturity to her features, as if the stillness itself had aged her into something almost beautiful. Her skin was pale. Her lips were slightly parted. The scars that had once looked violent had softened into lines that could almost be mistaken for something delicate. He leaned closer, eyes shining. When he was there, she wasn't afraid. That was one of the rules of this place, one of the truths he clung to. When he sat beside her, when he spoke softly, when the candles were lit, everything stayed calm. The air felt quiet, contained, like the barn held its breath with him. But if he fell asleep, if his head nodded even for a moment, if his eyes closed long enough for the candlelight to blur, she would start screaming again. It didn't matter that her mouth didn't move. The screaming filled the space anyway. It came from somewhere inside the barn, somewhere in the wood and the dirt and the mound beneath the bed. It tore through the night until he jolted awake, heart racing, hands scrambling for the candlelight like it could keep reality in place. He learned not to sleep deeply. He learned to nap in short, careful pieces, always ready to wake up at the first hint of sound. He learned that the dark, even for a second, was dangerous. That was why he bought candles. That was why he locked the door from the inside. That was why he hated Tuesdays, though he never said it out loud to anyone. Tuesdays were the day everything had changed. Tuesdays were the day the house had burned. Tuesdays were the day he had lost control and then regained it in a different form. This Tuesday meant he didn't have to leave anymore. He didn't have to go back to the job. He didn't have to clock in. He didn't have to pretend to be normal for people who didn't know what normal cost. He could stay here, with her. He crouched beside the bed, close enough to smell wax and earth. His breath fluttered in his chest like something trapped. His hands hovered over the girl's blanket, not quite touching. His eyes were bright with excitement now, the way a child's eyes get bright on the morning of something long awaited. Except he wasn't a child, and what he was waiting for wasn't a holiday. "I'm finished," he whispered, the words trembling with emotion. He looked at her face as if he expected her to blink, to smile, to speak. "I'll never have to leave you alone again." The candle flames leaned slightly, as if a draft had moved through the barn. For a moment, the shadows at the edges of the room seemed to deepen, then settle. And in that soft flickering light, the old man's smile widened, patient and sure, because at last the world outside had no claim on him anymore. He had locked the door, he had brought the toy, he had brought the candles. He had done what he believed a good father should do. He stayed. Story 4. There are nights in Oklahoma when the sky feels angry on purpose. Thunder hits so hard it rattles the dishes. The ground trembles like something huge is rolling underneath it. And the wind can scream so loud, it sounds like a freight train tearing straight through town. People who grow up here learn to respect storms, but what happened to my family didn't feel like weather. Not really. Tornado Valley was always dangerous, but the night my Uncle Charlie vanished, it felt like the storm had a mind, like something was hiding inside it, waiting for the right moment to reach in and take what it wanted. I was raised on the story of Charlie because his disappearance left a hole that never closed. My dad didn't talk about it all the time, but when he did, his voice always changed. He'd get quieter, like the memory made him careful. He would say Charlie wasn't like other kids, even when he was small. Not in a bad way at first, just different. Like his thoughts ran on a track no one else could see. My father always described him as brilliant. Teachers noticed it early. Charlie understood math faster than most kids, and when he was interested in something, he could focus for hours without getting bored. The problem was that he didn't have many interests. He had one: engineering. Some kids collected baseball cards. Some played video games. Some liked dirt bikes or comic books or sports. Charlie liked machines. He liked how things worked. If something broke in the house, He wanted to take it apart before anyone could throw it away. He'd sit on the floor with screws lined up in neat little rows, studying pieces like they were puzzles that could talk if you listened long enough. That obsession grew as he got older, and it latched onto something bigger than just fixing radios or lawnmowers. Charlie loved science fiction. He didn't just watch Star Wars and Star Trek and move on. He studied them. He rewound scenes. He wrote notes. He drew diagrams like he was trying to reverse engineer the future from a movie screen. At first, my grandparents thought it was harmless, a phase, a smart kid getting lost in stories. But Charlie didn't treat it like fiction. He treated it like a direction. One day when he and my dad were still kids, Charlie told my father something that sounded ridiculous if you didn't know him. He said he was going to build a spaceship. He wasn't joking. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He said it like he was stating a plan, like, I'm going to do my homework, or I'm going outside. He told Charlie it wasn't possible, that you couldn't just build a spaceship in Oklahoma with no money and no lab and no NASA engineers helping you. Charlie didn't argue much. He didn't need to. He just started building. He began with a radio. My dad said he watched Charlie work on it like it was a living thing. Charlie scavenged parts from broken televisions, old stereos, anything with wires and metal and circuit boards. He taped pieces together, soldered connections, adjusted dials with a seriousness that made him look older than he was. He said the radio wasn't for local stations. He wanted to reach beyond the stars. He wanted to talk to something out there. For the first month, it was all static. That didn't surprise anyone. It sounded like exactly what you'd expect a homemade space radio to sound like. Hiss, crackle, dead air. But Charlie didn't get discouraged. If anything, the lack of results made him more determined. He kept changing things, tweaking knobs, building new parts, making the radio bigger and more complicated. While he worked on the radio, he also started building his spaceship. The word spaceship makes people picture something sleek and silver, like a movie prop. What Charlie built was something else. It was scrap and engine parts and sheet metal. It was a rough shape that kind of resembled a small cockpit if you squinted. He bolted pieces together in the yard behind their house. It became this strange metal object that looked like a junk sculpture with a seat inside. The neighborhood kids would walk by and stare. Some would laugh. Some would dare each other to get close. After about a year, Charlie actually managed to get it to power on. That part always stuck with my dad. He said one day Charlie called him out back and told him to watch. Charlie flipped a switch and lights blinked on, weak and uneven, like the thing was trying to wake up. Something inside whirred. It made noise. It had power. But it couldn't move. Not really. It wasn't going to lift off the ground. It wasn't going to glide down the road. My father said if you tried to drive it, you'd get farther on a bicycle. That didn't matter to Charlie. He treated every tiny success like proof he was on the right path. Proof it was real. People started whispering that something was wrong with him. Kids at school teased him. They called him weird. They called him crazy. They made spaceship noises behind his back and laughed when he walked by. My grandparents tried to push him toward other hobbies, sports, scouts, anything that might balance him out. Charlie didn't budge. He didn't even react much. It was like their opinions didn't register as important enough to change his mission. Eventually, my grandparents stopped trying so hard. They were exhausted. They still loved him, but they didn't know what to do with a kid who lived half in their world and half in another one. Then Charlie told my dad something that changed everything. He said he had made contact, not, I think I heard something, not, maybe someone answered. He said it clearly. He had spoken to a man from beyond the stars. My father remembered the way Charlie said it. Calm, serious, like he was reporting a fact. My dad didn't believe him. He followed Charlie to the radio anyway, partly because he was curious, and partly because he wanted to prove Charlie was making it up. They sat together in that cramped little space where Charlie kept his equipment. Charlie turned the dials, adjusted knobs, pressed his ear close, and told my dad to listen. My dad heard nothing but static. Charlie insisted it was real. He insisted the man talked to him when no one else was around. He insisted the signal didn't always come through. He said it was complicated. He said the man had rules, conditions. My dad thought Charlie was lying or imagining things or maybe just trying to impress him. But the look on Charlie's face didn't match any prank. Charlie looked almost burdened, like he had been given a responsibility too big to share casually. Over the next few weeks, Charlie's behavior changed in a way my dad couldn't ignore. He got up early, before anyone else, and disappeared to use the radio alone. He started spending more time outside near the spaceship, working in silence. He stopped caring about things he used to tolerate, like school activities or family dinners. He said he was on a secret mission. He said the man from the stars was guiding him. Once, my dad joked about the man from Mars. He expected Charlie to roll his eyes or laugh. Instead, Charlie stared at him with such a flat, serious expression that my dad shut up immediately. He never made that joke again. After that, Charlie's focus shifted away from talking and toward building. He poured himself into the spaceship like it was the only thing keeping him anchored. At first, he collected parts from around the neighborhood the normal way. He asked people if they had junk they didn't want. He rummaged through piles on the curb. He traded small repairs for scraps. Then he needed more. Charlie started trying to raise money, saying he needed better parts. He sold little handmade gadgets. He begged relatives for cash. When that wasn't enough, he did something that crossed a line. He started stealing. It wasn't random stealing, like a kid taking candy. It was targeted. Tools, parts, anything he thought could help. He got caught more than once, and each time he said the same thing with complete conviction. I'm trying to save the world. Teachers suggested therapy. The school said he needed help. My grandparents didn't have money for it, and they also didn't want to accept that their son might be sick. They told themselves he was just gifted, just different, just intense. They tried discipline. They tried grounding him. They tried taking things away. Nothing worked because Charlie wasn't doing this to rebel. He wasn't trying to upset them. He truly believed he was right. He kept insisting the man he spoke to was real. He started saying the man would visit, that he would come and take Charlie away. That was the point where my grandparents got scared in a different way. Not scared of Charlie's imagination, but scared that an actual adult might be contacting him. An older man. Someone grooming him. Someone hiding behind a radio signal. So they finally did the harshest thing they could think of. They took away his radio. They took away the spacecraft. They locked things up. They tried to cut him off from whatever he believed he had found. Charlie didn't explode. He didn't scream. My father said that was the strangest part. Charlie just got quiet. Not calm quiet, empty quiet. Like something in him shut a door. My grandparents reported the situation to the police. They told them their son claimed someone was talking to him and planning to pick him up. The police asked what proof they had. There was no proof, no recordings, no clear messages, no evidence of a real person. Without evidence, the police did what they always do when something sounds too weird. They shrugged it off. Then Charlie said something that chilled my dad even years later. He said the man would come during a storm. That week, the forecast was clear. Blue skies, mild temperatures. Everyone dismissed Charlie's prediction. My grandparents rolled their eyes. My dad tried to ignore it, but he also couldn't forget the way Charlie looked. Not excited, not proud, sad. Charlie gave my dad a look that felt like a goodbye. And then he asked him, very simply, if he wanted to come along on the mission. My dad didn't know what to say. He was a kid. He didn't want to hurt his brother's feelings, but he didn't believe him either. He said something vague, something like, no, without saying it too hard. Charlie nodded, as if he expected that answer. The next day was sunny. They went to school like always. It almost felt like normal again, until the science teacher called home. She told my grandparents she was concerned because Charlie had said she was his favorite teacher and that he was going to miss her. When my father asked Charlie about the visit later, Charlie didn't hesitate. He said he would be picked up early in the morning. That night, the wind came up fast. It wasn't the slow build you usually get with Oklahoma weather, where you can smell rain coming hours before it hits. This was sudden, like someone flipped a switch. The news cut into regular programming with breaking alerts. A storm was forming. A severe storm. Warnings started appearing like the world had been waiting for permission to panic. My grandmother, according to my dad, stood by the window and said something about it being strange. Not just bad weather, but unusual weather. Like it arrived from nowhere with too much force, too quickly. The rain hit so hard my father couldn't see outside. The house filled with noise, trees cracking, branches slamming, loose objects outside being dragged across the yard. And beneath it all was that sound people describe the same way every time, because there's no better comparison. A freight train. The roof groaned like it wanted to lift off. Windows rattled, and then some of them cracked, and then one of them burst. My dad said the pressure in the air felt wrong, like his ears wouldn't pop, like his body was being squeezed. Then their father arrived home in the middle of it, and the whole house turned into frantic motion. Shouting, running feet, doors slamming. They rushed to the basement the way people in Tornado Valley are taught to do without thinking. My grandpa shoved my dad down the steps. My grandma followed, clutching whatever she could grab. Their father moved fast, trying to secure them, trying to make sure the basement door was shut tight. Then he realized Charlie wasn't with them. My grandpa went back up. My dad said that moment stretched like an hour. He sat in the basement, listening to the storm chew on the house, listening to the wind scream. My grandma prayed under her breath. My dad kept staring at the basement door, waiting for it to open and for Charlie to appear behind their father, scared and soaked and embarrassed. The door finally opened. My grandpa came back alone. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and he shook his head like he didn't even want to speak the words. He couldn't find Charlie. He called his name. He checked rooms. He looked outside as much as he could through the rain. Nothing. As the basement door started to close, my dad swore he saw something behind his grandfather. Something like a glimmer of light. Not from lightning, and not from a flashlight. A strange shine that didn't match anything else in the storm. The door shut, and in that heavy, terrified moment, my father wondered if Charlie had been telling the truth the whole time. The storm passed eventually, the way storms do. It left damage and debris and that weird quiet afterward where the world feels stunned. The next morning, they searched. Neighbors searched. Police searched. People asked questions. People whispered theories. Run away. Kidnapped. Swept away by the storm. Hurt somewhere and unable to call out. But there were no clues that stuck. No footprints that made sense. No trail. No broken window, no blood, no sign of where Charlie went. Months turned into years. Charlie never came home. No one ever found him. And even as time moved forward and life forced itself to continue, my father never forgot that look on Charlie's face when he offered him a place on the mission, or the way the storm arrived exactly when Charlie said it would. In Tornado Valley, people say weather can take everything from you. But my father always believed something else took his brother first. Story 5. It was a calm walk home after a Friday night out. The streets weren't empty, but they weren't crowded either. That late-night quiet was settling in. The kind that makes the city feel like it's holding its breath. I remember thinking it was nice how normal it felt. My phone was in my pocket. My keys were in my hand, and I was already picturing my bed. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't hear them approach. They didn't fade in from far away the way a real person's steps do when they're gaining on you. 1 second, there was only the sound of my own shoes on the sidewalk. And the next second, there were 2 sets of footsteps. About 15 feet back, the timing was what made my stomach tighten. Every time my foot touched down, his foot touched down, too. Perfectly matched. like a second track layered over mine, like someone had practiced my pace. At first, I told myself it was just some guy walking at the same speed. That happens. People fall into the same rhythm on sidewalks all the time, especially when the street is straight and there's nothing to slow either person down. But this wasn't that. There was something off about the sound. His footsteps didn't have the normal slap or scuff of a shoe hitting concrete. It was softer, like the bottom of his foot didn't strike the ground, more like it pressed into it. A gentle touch. And yet it was still loud. Too loud for something that sounded so light. I tried to slow down. The footsteps slowed down at the exact same time. I sped up a little, just to test it. They sped up too, no lag at all. The feeling that someone was behind me turned into something heavier. Not just awareness, not just caution. It was like my body had recognized a pattern my brain hadn't accepted yet. I stopped. The footsteps stopped with me, at the same moment. Not a half second later, not with the natural delay of someone reacting. It was like we were connected. I stood still, staring ahead, pretending I was checking my phone, even though I wasn't moving my hands. My heart was thumping hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I listened for breathing behind me. A cough, a shuffle, anything human. Nothing, just silence that felt full. I did something stupid then. Something I only did because panic makes you try weird things. I jumped. A quick hop, both feet leaving the sidewalk at once. When I landed, there was only my landing. No second landing, no echo of weight coming down behind me. That's when the cold hit me properly. Not the weather. The kind of cold that starts under your skin. I turned around fast, already reaching for the pocket knife I carried. It wasn't a big knife. Just a small one I kept for opening packages or cutting string, something I barely thought about until moments like this. The second I saw what was behind me, I knew the knife wouldn't matter. It looked human. That was the worst part. No obvious monster features, no twisted limbs, no glowing eyes, no grin stretched too wide. Just a person-shaped figure standing there about 15 feet away. His head was tilted down, as if he was staring at the sidewalk. I couldn't see his face at all. The streetlight above him didn't help. The angle of his head kept everything hidden. His body wasn't moving. Not even in the small ways people move when they stand. No shifting weight, no adjusting balance, no fidgeting. And yet, his posture was wrong. He was stuck in a walking forward position, like someone had paused a video at the exact moment mid-step. One foot slightly ahead, shoulders set as if he was moving, but frozen. It looked like a statue that had been placed on the sidewalk and forgotten. My mouth went dry. I tried to speak, even just to say hey, but nothing came out. I backed up a step. He didn't move. I took another step back, then paused. He still didn't move. For a second, I felt foolish, like maybe I had scared myself for nothing. Like maybe he was drunk or playing some creepy prank. The pocket knife felt ridiculous in my hand. I started walking toward him, slowly at first, then with more confidence, telling myself I was going to see his face. Tell him to stop. Call someone if I had to. The moment I moved toward him, he moved too. Except he didn't turn around. He walked away from me backward. It wasn't like someone moonwalking or stumbling. It was clean, smooth, controlled, the way it would look if you filmed a person walking normally and then played the footage in reverse. His legs did the right motions, but the direction was wrong. His body stayed facing me while he drifted backward down the sidewalk, still looking at the ground, still hiding his face. I stopped again. He stopped again, perfectly synced. I took one step to the left. He shifted in a way that made my stomach twist. He didn't step like a person does. He rotated, twisted, like his body could turn without moving his feet properly, like his joints weren't joints. I started testing it because fear makes you do experiments instead of running. Like if you gather enough data, you'll find the solution. I walked forward toward a street pole where the sidewalk narrowed. He backed toward it without turning, and when his body reached the pole, he went straight through it. Not around it, not brushing it, through it, Like the pole wasn't there at all, like he was an image projected onto the street rather than something solid. For a split second, the pole seemed to cut through him, dividing him into two halves, and then he was past it, whole again, unchanged. My breath caught hard. I turned my body slightly just to angle away from him. He twisted to match. Still not lifting his head, still refusing to show me his face, I took a few steps faster, almost a jog. He matched me exactly, staying that same distance behind, his soft, loud steps landing with mine like a second heartbeat. I ran, he ran too. Same speed, same rhythm, same distance. I should have screamed. I should have banged on someone's door or called someone on speaker. But the street was quiet, and my pride fought my fear for a few seconds. And those seconds mattered. I didn't want to be the person who panics over nothing. I didn't want to explain why I was scared of a guy who technically hadn't done anything. So I did the dumbest thing. I tried to ignore him. I kept moving toward home, faster now, half running, half walking, telling myself that if I just got inside, if I just got behind a locked door, whatever this was would lose interest. The whole time, those footsteps stayed perfectly in sync with mine. Soft, loud, wrong. When I reached my building, I fumbled with my keys. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped them once. When I finally got the door open and slipped inside, I slammed it behind me and locked it fast, my fingers clumsy. I stood there for a moment in the dark entryway, listening. No footsteps, no knock. I moved to the window and looked out. It was there, right outside, exactly where it would be if it had followed me to the door and stopped at the threshold, still in that same frozen walking posture, head tilted down. If its head had been lifted, it would have looked like it was staring right into my window. I backed away from the glass. I turned on lights, more than I needed, because brightness felt like protection even though I knew it wasn't. My pocket knife sat useless in my palm. I put it on the table and stared at it like it had betrayed me by being so small. I didn't want to go to bed, but I also didn't want to stand there all night watching the window. I kept imagining that if I blinked, it would lift its head, or its hand would tap the glass, or it would be inside without ever opening a door. I ended up in bed anyway because exhaustion is its own kind of surrender. I lay there, stiff under the sheets, staring toward the window. I couldn't see it clearly from where I was, but I could feel it out there in the dark, like pressure against the house. Time crawled. My eyes burned. My thoughts repeated themselves until they stopped making sense. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up again, the room was still dark. For a moment, I thought it was morning, but the air didn't feel right. It felt too still, too heavy. I checked my phone. 2 a.m. I had only been asleep for a short time. My heart started pounding again, because waking up at that hour always feels like a warning, like your body knows something your mind doesn't. I didn't want to look toward the window. I didn't want to confirm it was still there. I lay frozen, telling myself it had been a hallucination, a trick of tired eyes after a night out, maybe even a weird dream that had spilled into waking life. But I couldn't resist. Slowly, like moving would make it worse, I turned my head toward the window. I prayed while I did it. Not a polite prayer, a desperate one. The kind you make when you promise everything and mean nothing except please. My heart raced so hard my fingers tingled. My arms went numb. My stomach felt like it was dropping through the bed. I looked. Nothing. The space outside the window was empty. No frozen figure. No shadow shaped like a person. No movement. Just darkness and the street and the normal quiet of night. I turned on the bedside lamp, then the overhead light. Nothing in the room. Nothing outside. Relief hit me so fast I almost laughed. My whole body felt loose, like I had been clenched into a fist and finally opened. I told myself I made it up. I told myself my mind had played a cruel game. My prayers worked. I was safe. That's what I thought then. I lay back down. My thoughts slowed. My eyes closed. I slept again, deeper this time, comforted by the idea that the fear had passed. Then I woke up to my alarm, or what I thought was my alarm to a random sound, something different each morning so I don't get used to it and sleep through it. But I'd never heard this one before. It wasn't a ringtone, it wasn't a song. It was a whistle, slow, steady, almost gentle. Not a melody I recognized, but it had shape to it, like someone whistling a tune they knew well, except it didn't loop the way an alarm loops. It kept changing, verse after verse, getting slightly louder each time. I reached out to shut it off, still half asleep, irritated in that normal morning way. My finger hit the phone screen. Nothing happened. The whistle continued. I tried again, harder, fumbling, squinting at the screen. Nothing. The whistle didn't come from my phone. It came from everywhere. It filled the room like sound with weight. It wasn't just in my ears. It felt like it was inside my head, vibrating behind my eyes, pressing against my teeth. It was like wearing headphones even though there were no headphones. Like the sound had found a way under my skin. It got louder, slowly, patiently, like it had all the time in the world. I held my breath without meaning to. The whistle grew louder. Then it stopped. The silence afterward was so sudden it felt like a drop. And then I felt breathing on my right cheek. Not warm breath. Not the soft heat of a human body close to yours in bed. Cold breath like air from outside in winter. Like wind slipping through a crack in a window. My blood turned to ice. Someone was above me, close enough that I could feel each exhale touch my skin. Close enough that they didn't have to speak to make themselves known. I heard the wind outside too, a low howl I hadn't heard earlier. At some point while I slept, a storm had built up. The kind of storm that turns trees into shadows and makes the world sound angry. I realized, all at once, that the thing from the sidewalk wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. I didn't move at first. My body refused. My mind raced through useless options. Run, scream, grab the knife, call for help. But my arms felt heavy and my throat felt locked. I forced myself to turn my head to the right. Very slowly, the room was dim, lit only by a weak glow through the curtains and flashes of distant lightning outside. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. A shape, a person's shape. Then another flash of lightning lit the room for a split second, and I saw it clearly enough to know I would never forget it. It was right there, leaned over my bed, close to my face. Its head was lifted now, and it was staring straight at me, not down at the ground anymore, not hiding. Seeing my face for the first time, like it had been waiting for this exact moment, this exact angle, this exact vulnerability. The whistle hadn't been an alarm at all. It had been it. A sound to wake me up gently, the way you wake something you don't want to startle. A sound that grew louder until I couldn't pretend I was still asleep. I can't describe what happened next. Not properly. Not in a way that feels safe to write. Some stories feel like they carry things with them, like if you put the details into words, you're giving the thing a map to whoever reads it. So I'll just say this. I understood then why it matched my footsteps, why it stayed 15 feet back, why it copied my timing like a reflection. It wasn't following me. It was learning how to move like me. And if you don't want to end up the way I did, if you ever hear footsteps behind you that land exactly when yours do, with that soft, loud touch, don't stop to look, don't test it, don't run. Just keep walking, keep walking, keep walking. Story 6. I installed the baby monitor camera while he slept in the bassinet beside me. I remember how careful I was opening the box, like it was something fragile and expensive and important. The packaging was clean and confident, covered in promises, HD video, motion tracking, smart alerts, night vision, two-way audio, everything a tired parent could want, everything designed to make you feel like you could finally unclench your body for 5 minutes. I was exhausted enough to believe the marketing. The first night I used it, the alerts worked exactly the way the box said they would. When he cried, my phone buzzed immediately. When he stirred, the camera followed his movement before I could even swing my legs out of bed. I could see every tiny twitch of his fingers, the soft rise and fall of his chest, his mouth working in that sleepy way babies do when they're half dreaming. The picture was so clear it felt like cheating. The grainy monitors people used to have looked like ancient history compared to this. In the app, my son looked sharper than he did in real life at 2 in the morning, when my eyes were sandy and my brain felt wrapped in cotton. After a while, I stopped checking on him physically unless I had to. I know how that sounds. I know the guilt that comes with saying it out loud. But anyone who's been through those early months understands how quickly you start doing anything that makes you feel a little more functional. If the feed was right there on my phone, if I could see his chest rising, if the app told me he was okay, then I could stay in bed. I could keep the room dark. I could avoid waking him with the creak of the floor. I could avoid waking myself fully, which meant I might be able to fall back asleep. The feed felt safer than walking into the room. It was controlled, bright, stable. It was clearer than reality. The first time something felt off, I didn't even let myself name it. It was small, the kind of thing you can explain away without trying. I was watching him one night the way I sometimes did, not because he'd made a noise, but because I couldn't sleep and staring at him calmed me down. He was asleep on a screen, curled slightly to the right, one arm tucked under his chin. His cheeks looked impossibly soft in the night vision. The camera had framed him perfectly, like the crib was a little stage and he was the only thing worth lighting. I stared for a long time, longer than I meant to. I watched his breathing until my own started matching it. Then I realized I needed to use the bathroom, and while I was up, I decided to peek in on him the old-fashioned way, just to reassure myself that I was still a real parent and not someone raising a child through an app. I walked into his room as quietly as I could. He was on his back with both arms out, the way babies sometimes sleep when they're deep under, flat, open, like a tiny starfish. I stood there in the doorway, confused, my hand still on the doorframe. I had the very clear memory of him being curled on his side, his arm tucked under his chin. I could still see the exact angle of his elbow on the screen. I frowned and took a slow step forward, careful not to wake him. He didn't move. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of the humidifier. I told myself I must have mixed it up. Sleep deprivation does that. Your brain stitches together moments and makes a story out of them. I'd read about it in parenting forums. People hallucinate. People forget if they fed the baby 5 minutes ago. People set their phones in the fridge. Still, it bothered me enough that I pulled out my phone and opened the app again right there in his doorway. The feed showed him exactly as he was in the crib, on his back, both arms out, as if it had always been that way. As if I hadn't been staring at a different position seconds earlier. My stomach tightened. I checked the signal icon. Full bars. No warning about connection issues. No spinning loading wheel. I stood there with the glow of the screen lighting my hands, feeling foolish. Maybe the app had lagged, I told myself. Maybe it had frozen on an older frame and then caught up when I reopened it. These things weren't perfect. They were just gadgets. I left the room and went back to bed, but I kept thinking about it, trying to reconstruct what I'd seen. Curled to the right, arm under his chin, I remembered it too clearly for it to be nothing, and that was the problem. If it had been vague, I could have dismissed it. But it had been crisp, like the feed had been giving me a version of him that was close enough to calm me down. A week later, I saw the shadow. It was just after 2 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I checked it afterward, as if the number could anchor me. I woke up without knowing why. That sudden parent wake-up that snaps you out of sleep like a hand around your wrist. The bedroom was dark, and my phone was on the nightstand. A soft notification glow pulsed against the wall. Motion detected, I picked up the phone and opened the app. The nursery was lit in that eerie gray-green of night vision. My son was awake. His eyes were open wide. Not sleepy. He wasn't crying. He wasn't fussing. He was just staring past the crib bars into the corner of the room. Babies stare at corners. I knew that. They stare at ceiling fans, at shadows. At nothing, their eyes catch light in weird ways. They're still learning what the world is. But the way he was looking made my skin prickle. It didn't look like drifting attention. It looked focused, like he was watching an adult stand there. I followed his gaze without thinking, my own eyes moving across the grainy image to the corner. Nothing. The corner was dim and empty, just the outline of a dresser, the edge of a chair, a pile of laundry I hadn't folded. Ordinary clutter. Then, on the screen, something moved. Not a clear shape, not a person. Just a section of darkness that slid into view, as if a shadow was crossing the corner. It moved in and then moved back out again, smooth and quick, like someone had leaned forward and then withdrawn. My heart thumped hard enough to hurt. The camera adjusted slightly, tilting a fraction to the left. It was subtle, but I saw it. The motion tracking had engaged, as if the camera was trying to keep whatever moved centered in frame. I sat up in bed so fast I felt dizzy. The app was still open. My son's eyes were still fixed on the same spot. I didn't wait. I didn't sit there and debate. I swung my legs out of bed and went straight down the hallway. The house felt wrong at night in a way it hadn't before, as if the walls were listening. I moved quickly, bare feet silent on the floor, one hand gripping the phone so tightly it hurt. I pushed the nursery door open. The room was dark. Normal dark, not the night vision view. The small nightlight in the outlet gave a dim glow, barely enough to see the crib outline. There was nothing in the corner, nothing behind the chair, nothing by the dresser. No movement, no shape, no person. My son was lying there, awake, eyes open, breathing quietly. When I leaned over the crib, his gaze shifted to my face, and he made a small sound like a sigh. Relief, I told myself. He was relieved I was there. I picked him up. He was warm, real, heavy in my arms, the kind of weight that makes you feel grounded. I stood in the nursery for a while, scanning the corner again and again, waiting for my fear to fade into embarrassment. Eventually, I put him back down. He didn't cry. His eyes drifted closed, like nothing had happened. I went back to my room, but I couldn't sleep. My body stayed on high alert, like it expected the app to buzz again. In the morning, when sunlight made the nursery look harmless and ordinary, I told myself it had been nothing, a trick of the camera, the way night vision reacts to shifting light, a car passing outside, a tree branch. But I couldn't leave it alone. After breakfast, while he napped, I opened the app and navigated to the timestamp from the night before. The interface was smooth, easy, designed for parents like me who wanted proof. I found the clip and hit play. There he was, awake, staring through the crib bars. Then his head turned, slowly and deliberately, toward the corner. Not a lazy baby movement, not random, controlled, like he was following a cue. The shadow moved onto the screen, then off again, exactly the same way I'd seen it live. My mouth went dry. I replayed it. I leaned closer. I tried to make the shadow into something logical, a bug crawling near the lens, a glitch in the infrared, a compression artifact. It didn't behave like an artifact. It behaved like something with intention. I kept watching, my finger hovering over the timeline, and 15 minutes later he did it again. His head turned. Same angle, same speed, same pause. The shadow moved into view and out again. My skin went cold. A ghost? I whispered, and the words sounded stupid even in my own kitchen. I almost laughed. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to turn it into a story I could tell a friend with a shaky smile. Don't be stupid, I muttered under my breath, harsher than I meant to, like I was scolding myself back into reality. Then I noticed something that made the laugh die in my throat. It was exactly the same. Not similar. Identical. Frame for frame. I scrubbed back 15 minutes and watched the second incident again. The movement wasn't just similar. The shadow entered the same number of pixels from the edge. The camera tilt happened at the exact same moment. My son's head reached the same angle at the same time. Even a little twitch in his left hand happened in the same place. My stomach turned over. I scrubbed back and watched again. and again. Perfectly identical. A loop. The kind of loop you see when a security camera freezes and keeps replaying the last few seconds while the system tries to reconnect. The kind of loop you get when a device runs out of storage and starts overriding in a broken pattern. The kind of loop you get when the feed isn't really live anymore, but you're being shown something that looks live because it's easier than telling you the truth. I stared at the timestamp. It skipped forward 3 seconds in the middle of the shadow's motion. Not a big jump, just enough that if you weren't looking for it, you might miss it. But I saw it. Then I noticed the audio. It was slightly behind his breathing, by a fraction of a second. Enough to make the room feel wrong if you watched long enough, like watching a badly dubbed movie where the mouth doesn't match the words. My hands started shaking so hard I had to set the phone down on the table. The feed wasn't live, at least not anymore. A thought tried to form, one my mind refused at first. If the feed wasn't live, then what had I been watching at 2 in the morning? If I had seen him awake, staring into the corner, and that wasn't the real present, then where had he been while I watched the loop? My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. I didn't think. That was the scariest part. I didn't plan. I didn't rationalize. I didn't grab a weapon or call someone or check the front door. I just ran. I ran down the hallway so fast my feet slipped on the wood. I ran like my body had decided that whatever was happening was already too late, and the only chance I had was speed. My phone was still in my hand, the screen glowing, the nursery footage still playing, my son's eyes still staring into that corner that maybe didn't exist. I reached his door and shoved it open so hard it slammed against the wall. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. I rushed to the crib, breath ragged, and looked down. The crib was empty. The fitted sheet lay smooth, undisturbed, as if no baby had been there at all. No blanket kicked aside. No pacifier. No little shape of a body. Nothing. For a second, my brain refused it. It tried to correct reality. It tried to make my eyes see what they were supposed to see. I blinked hard and looked again, leaning closer as if the baby might be tucked into a corner I couldn't see. Empty. I turned in a circle, wild-eyed, scanning the room. The chair, the closet, under the changing table, the corner where the shadow had moved on the screen. Nothing. Then I heard it. Not from the app, not from the monitor speaker. A small sound, faint and wet, coming from somewhere else in the house. A baby sound. A half cry, half gasp. The kind of noise he made when he was just waking up and deciding whether to scream. It came from behind me, from the hallway, and when I whipped around, I saw the phone in my hand still showing the nursery, still showing him in the crib, still alive on the screen, still staring into the corner, as if the camera wanted me looking at the wrong place, while something in my real house moved in the dark with my child.